Hi, my name is Chloe Shang, and today I'll be going over trauma and its effects on brain morphology and symptomatology, as well as how this impacts one's sense of self. While a lot of what I'll be going over may be applied to various disorders, I'll primarily be looking and emphasizing post-traumatic stress disorder and dissociative identity disorder. As terms defined by the American Psychological Association, identity is defined by an individual's sense of self, specifically their set of physical, psychological, and interpersonal characteristics. Such a sense is derived from one's body sensation, one's body image, and the feeling that one's memories, goals, values, expectations, and beliefs belong to the self. Trauma is defined as a disruptive feeling intense enough to have a long lasting negative effect on a person's attitudes, behaviors, and other aspects of functioning. Traumatic events include those caused by human behavior as well as by nature and often challenge an individual's view of the world as a just, safe, and predictable place. Thus, trauma can be seen as a sort of defining event or events which disrupts or alters one's sense of identity, often inhibiting typical functioning. On a physiological level, stress and trauma go hand in hand, as stress is essentially an alteration in the body's typical functioning in response to a perceived external threat. It primarily involves brain structures such as the amygdala, which initiates the signaling, and the hypothalamus, which utilizes the pituitary gland to communicate with the rest of the body via the circulatory system, which leads to the activation of a division of the nervous system known as the sympathetic nervous system, and leads to this overarching response known as the fight or flight response. It should also be noted that the hippocampus is involved with the recollection and encoding of memories, and it is in particularly close quarters with the amygdala. It's the amygdala combined with the hippocampus, though there are other cortical structures involved, which is responsible for encoding of episodic and autobiographical memories. However, with the onset of stress, this causes a disruption in the body's ability to regulate this response, impacting various other bodily systems. This can especially contribute to the expression of genes, known as epigenetics, and involves a process known as methylation, which is especially known to occur under stress, where essentially a gene's expression is inhibited. This in turn can impact neuronal development, function, communication, and in turn overall brain development. While there are various processes involved, your nervous system's neurons communicate through the release of various chemicals known as neurotransmitters. In the brain, these processes are constantly occurring. And from infancy to adolescence, the brain is especially malleable as you interact with the world around you. This malleability is what's known as neuroplasticity, and it refers to the ability of the brain to produce new or even reorganize synaptic connections. In turn, the brain and its various functions are especially localized but interact to form global connections to produce a coherent perception. Also, when referring to functions, this ranges from consolidating an internal model of the external world, socialization, learning, language acquisition, but especially with consolidating a coherent sense of self as these various concepts are consolidated into memory. This is essentially what forms the core foundation of an individual's sense of identity. Both in symptoms and by origin, both DID and PTSD share various commonalities, as at their core, they are the result of trauma. Certain symptoms that are shared include amnesia and numbing. Alongside this, there are various comorbidities between the two, as PTSD patients of around 15 to 30% have reported experiencing dissociative symptoms. Alongside this, PTSD and DID are known to be especially comorbid with one another. Of course, while the two do share similarities, they do have prominent differences, especially within the DSM-5. For one, dissociative identity disorder is majorly understood as the disconnection from one's sense of self, known as depersonalization, and the disconnect from one's surroundings, known as derealization. Interestingly, there is sometimes the presence of more than one identity. There is the host, who is mainly marked by their predominant presence and their contingency in personal and present history, while an alter is majorly identified as a sort of other alternative personality with their own sense of history, memories, and identity. Dissociative amnesia is when the host themselves cannot recollect a period of time, and this can especially occur when the alter was active. Whereas PTSD is majorly marked as a disorder which develops as a result of stressful or multiple stressful events. In PTSD, the fight or flight response is in overdrive, and the symptoms are marked by hypervigilance, intrusive flashbulb memories, exaggerated startle responses, and even difficulties in sleep as a result of nightmares and this vigilance. Though it differs, what is interesting is that even children with PTSD have been shown to dissociate, though it differs as these children often reenact troubling experiences. However, it should be noted that by origin, DID is caused by trauma, especially during childhood in vital neuronal development, whereas PTSD may be diagnosed or originate at any point in someone's life. In turn, similarities and differences in symptoms can be attributed to differences in morphology, or I guess similarities in morphology as well. One major example of this is the hippocampus, a structure responsible for the consolidation of external stimuli into memories, alongside retrieval, as mentioned before. Both in DID and PTSD, the structure is identified to be low in volume. This can especially be utilized to explain one of the prominent commonalities between the two being amnesia or memory impairment, especially surrounding events which were particularly stressful. The major reason for this low volume is currently understood to be due to elevated corticosteroids within the hypothalamus, which, while vital to helping instigate that fight or flight response, this has been shown to reduce neuronal regeneration. In fact, this has gone into explaining why the cortical thickness of the brains of those with PTSD and DID tend to be lower. While I would also say a similar finding was made with the amygdala, in individuals with PTSD, this still remains inconclusive, though studies indicate high activity in the amygdala in contrast to normal control groups. This is attributed to the reduction in connectivity between areas involved in inhibiting amygdala activity, specifically higher cortical areas known as the prefrontal and anterior cingulate cortex, thus explaining the onset of flashbulb memories as the amygdala congruently impacts activation of the hippocampus, and in turn, episodic and autobiographical memories are basically being activated. This as well causes the hypervigilance observed in those with PTSD. Interestingly, though, for individuals with DID, early stress has seemed to impact the allocation of resources within the brain, especially as metabolic activity has been illustrated to be much lower in the somatosensory cortex, an area responsible for tactile perception, which may contribute to symptoms of depersonalization or feeling detached as if you were an outside observer. In conjunction with understandings of PTSD and DID, what is particularly interesting is that due to similarities in origins and even a staggering, again, 15 to 30% of PTSD patients experiencing dissociative symptoms, some go as far as to regard the idea as being a type of PTSD developed in childhood. And it's these sorts of debates, especially regarding the validity of the idea, which may be the reason there still continues to be limited research into it, even as technology has further advanced to observe brain morphology and functioning. Nonetheless, there are still various theories on DID and why these symptoms present in the way that they do, with understanding of the nervous system's development in congruence to general effects of trauma, and of course, brain imaging studies at the turn of the 21st century. For one, DID has been identified to have a strong relation to disorganized attachment styles. This particular attachment style theoretically is believed to derive from inconsistent parenting. An example is that a guardian presents as more caring and warm to switching to perhaps aloof or even aggressive. Essentially, the parents' presentations of themselves are unpredictable, which in turn makes it difficult for the child to fully trust in forming a proper attachment to the main caregiver. Thus, a particular theory developed from these findings is the betrayal trauma theory, which suggests that dissociative amnesia is an adaptive response to childhood abuse that allows for survival by enabling the child to maintain attachment to an abusive figure who is also vital to his or her development. Alongside this, studies have also identified reductions in cortical thickness and surface areas of the brains involved with brain areas involved with auditory as well as tactile perception, which can be attributed to derealization symptoms where one feels disconnect from their physical environment, as well as structures such as the parahippocampal cortex, and even orbitofrontal cortex, with the parahippocampal in particular being attributed to cognitive, emotional, and sensory motor dissociation. However, it is the orbitofrontal cortex which is in a special structure of interest, as DID patients also exhibited orbitofrontal hypoperfusion in comparison with normal control groups, especially with the onset of the host identity. In turn, one theory proposed is the orbitofrontal model, which is essentially the idea that due to this structure in particular being one of the last to take form in neural development and its role in playing in essentially controlling proper or being involved in proper emotional regulation, its maturation overall is just heavily based on external experiences. Thus, researchers as a part of the study proposed that onset of trauma impacts the proper development of this particular area, resulting in these differences between host and alter states. Overall, the development of DID is particularly complex and still not well understood in terms of symptoms origin, though it can be this myriad of factors from trauma experienced early in life, which could in turn lead to an inability to properly develop a unified sense of self. Uniquely, this causes the arising of two distinct personalities, as well as amnesia these individuals suffer from, alongside contributing to their symptoms of dissociation and depersonalization. So, how does this impact identity and possibly even apply to various disorders? Firstly, there is an impact of who one is, especially based on their recall of vital memories. And this could, of course, be seen in those with PTSD and DID who are exposed to chronic stress, and this impairs proper connectivity of the brain. Alongside this, chronic stress has been known to lead to susceptibility in the development of various neurodegenerative disorders, such as Alzheimer's to even dementia, which leave these individuals unable to recall those closest to them or even their core memories. Amnesia can also be caused by direct damage to neurons from traumatic brain injury, such as a concussion. And secondly, there is an overall impact on one's sense of self, whether it be in how they interpret their surroundings or experience it, as we've gone over in dissociative identity disorder. Stress or adversity early on in childhood has also been linked to the development of disorders such as major depression and generalized anxiety. Those with these disorders have shown innate cognitive biases in their brain activity, especially in perceiving neutral and even negative stimuli pessimistically due to activity in their amygdala. Even personality disorders such as borderline personality disorder have been found to be heavily influenced by familial upbringing. All in all, by connecting the origins of various disorders and symptomatology with particular emphasis on how earlier versus later life may affect the development of the body and even brain's physiology, I hope to give an overview of how biological mechanisms can be grounded in seemingly abstract philosophical or even humanitarian concepts, which are trauma and identity. Thank you for listening, and I hope you were able to gain insight on these topics and various disorders through my presentation. And if you would like, please refer to these materials if you'd like to learn anything else or look into what I looked into. Okay, thank you and goodbye.